What I would like to do in this video is talk just briefly about what discrete mathematics is, and then go over the first little bit of Python that you'll be working on in the first half of Chapter 2, this Intro to Python section. So again, we're going to be using this book. It's just called Discrete Math, written by Dr. Mohammed Jamaluddin, Dr. Kathy Pinzon, Dr. Dan Pregel, myself, and Dr. Sebastian Siva. So I want to encourage you to read this textbook. I feel like it's mostly readable, and it gives you a lot of background. But we have this first chapter on introducing discrete mathematics. Okay. Now, in most of your other math classes, you've encountered things that are continuous. For example, we have this continuous function. This is the graph of x squared. And intuitively, in college algebra, we tend to think of a continuous function, and even in pre-calculus, as a function that you can draw without taking your pen up or pencil up off of the paper. And you can certainly do that here. This is a continuous function. Now I want you to contrast that with this. Okay, let me put the x squared graph up here one more time. And now these points, these bluish greenish glowing points, notice that they are on the graph of x squared. But if I just consider them as points, just this point, this point, this point, these are discrete points. That is, to get from one to the other, I have to jump. I don't have a smooth line going from one to the other. And that's kind of a fundamental division in mathematics. That we have the continuous objects, like continuous functions that we study in calculus, and we have discrete objects that you would study in a discrete math class, or in discrete probability, or in a combinatorics class or a graph theory class. So that's what we mean when we say discrete mathematics. We're studying these discrete objects. Now, another way to think of that is, and then going back to the book, objects are discrete if there is a gap between the elements. Okay? Some examples and applications of discrete mathematics are things like applications to combinatorics, to counting problems, to graph theory. And graph theory can be applied to chemistry, or to computer science, or iTech, to algorithm analysis. Another application is probability and statistics, the social sciences, the mathematics of voting. So all of these things are examples of how discrete mathematics is used. And I want to encourage you to go ahead and read through the rest of that section to get a better idea of not a better idea, but maybe a more broad idea of what discrete mathematics is. Now, moving on to Python, which is the first section that we're going to be covering in the course. Okay. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about Python or computer languages or environments or things like that. We're going to be using Python Tutor for the most part, which uses Python 3. I'm going to share below this video some links to my favorite IDE package type of thing to use Python, which is Anaconda. If you want to go more in depth, but all you'll have to use for this class is just Python Tutor and then this basic syntax. And again, I want to remind you that at the very bottom of the book, we have this Appendix 2, which is all Python syntax. Okay, everything that you'll need for this class. Okay, now, again, we're using Python Tutor. It's these little code snippets that you can just cycle through, and you can see over here in this little blue section, it's what Python has saved, and then we have print dialog outputs up here in this upper right. Now, if you click Edit in Python Tutor, it automatically opens up that code in Python Tutor in this little live programming mode, or excuse me, in this visualized execution mode. Now, once you're here, click on Live Programming, and now you can run this step by step. You can start over, run it step by step, skip to the last, and then you can edit this. Say you want to print out something at the end that says this is a print. I'll skip to the end, and now you can see it has this as a print now. All right, going back to the book. This is just a simple program, and we're going to talk about what all of these things are doing as we go through the different sections of the book. Before we do, I want to talk about comments. Commenting is always important to do when you're writing code, so that not only other people can read it, but so that when you come back and read it later, you know what you're talking about. So comments in Python start with a pound. Okay? Anything following the pound on the same line will not be executed. All right, so you can put a pound. This line is not Python code, it is a comment. So just be aware of what comments are. Okay? Now, data types. There are more data types than just these, but the main ones we're going to be talking about are integers, floats, booleans, and strings. And then we'll talk about the set data type when we get to chapter 4. But some examples of the integer data type, well, they're integers. 2, -2, 0, what is this? 834,529. These are all integer data types. Floats you can think of as basically numbers with a decimal point. Okay? And notice 7.0 is listed as a float, not an integer. Booleans are just values that are true and false, and strings are anything inside quotation marks. And notice they can be single quotes, as in hello world, or individual quotes, as in coconut. Notice I have this 4 plus 6 in quotes, and also 0 in quotes. The quotation marks makes those strings, okay? Even though 0 is an integer, when you put it in quotes, that turns it into a string. Now, I want to jump over to the notes that are on D2L to see how the notes are summarizing everything in the book and everything that I'm kind of talking about, okay? So it's just talking about we use Python 3, we have data types, these are the 3 data types, etc. So don't just read through the notes or just watch the videos, also go to the textbook too to see what things, what other things are covered. Okay? Now, variables. Variables are just like boxes that store things that you can call later. So this Python tutor example is showing you how to store variables in Python, and we do that with a single equal sign. So I'm going to click Next to step one line down, and this tells me under global frame that A, the variable A, is now storing the integer 4. If I click another one, the variable B is now storing the string hello world exclamation point. C is storing the boolean false, and then notice I can have a more complicated variable, P1 sub points, okay? That is storing the integer 1337, which is a little bit of a inside joke. All right. So there you go. Now, again, going back to the notes, here's a little video example on variables that I encourage you to watch a little bit later. But now I want to move on to operators. Okay. Operators are things that you do with variables, or excuse me, not variables, but with things that are entered into Python. So for example, I'm going to store the variable A to be 4 plus 2, the integer 4 plus 2. What do you think that's going to do? Well, it's going to do the obvious. It's going to store 6 in A. What's A times 2 going to do? Well, it's going to store B as 8 times 2, which is 12. But now what happens? When I click the next one, A is now saved as 100, but B didn't change. That's an important thing that I want you to think about. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go through all these. I encourage you to go through the rest of these and see what happens, but I do want to point out to pay particular attention to the difference between the 2 slashes, the percent sign, and the 1 slash. Okay, pay attention to what those do. All right, and it's talked about in the notes, but this is one of those things that I want you to spend some time working on and thinking about the difference between, the floor division and the mod operator and kind of play around with it. Okay. Another one that I'm going to encourage you to go through on your own are Boolean expressions. And we're going to talk more about these in the notes. It talks about them here under Boolean expressions. But the things to pay attention to are double equal sign, okay? Exclamation point equals, greater than. Okay, I want you to pay attention to what these do and to what Boolean outputs we have. So for example, I'm going to just jump down to F. So F is the red line, it's the next one to be executed. Okay, F is going to be stored as x greater than 5. Well, x is already saved as 10. 10 is greater than 5, so F is going to be the Boolean true. Okay, so read through the notes to see what these Booleans do. This one is equals, this is not equal to, greater than, and less than, and then go back and think about what happens when you go through these and see if you can understand what's going on there. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is printing. Okay, when you're going to print something in Python, you'll call the print function. So you'll type print, parentheses, and inside the parentheses is what you want to print. So for example, just to print a string, you would type print, parentheses, quotation marks, the string, and it prints hello world. Now notice this. It didn't print A. A is a variable that is saved, so Python has not printed this out. Okay? Now I'm also going to save the variable 6 times 7 is 42. Now I'm going to call print with two different variables separated by a comma. And notice it printed the first one, which was the string, the answer is, and then it printed the next one, which was 42. I can do not only variables in there, I can combine booleans and strings and integers and strings. So now I'm going to print false hobbit 1 ring. So that's how print statements work. Okay? Again, back to the notes. Go through these, practice some of this, watch these extra videos that are linked in here, and then I have some practice problems for you. Okay? So use Python Tutor to do these problems. Don't just try to do them on your own. Use Python Tutor to try and work through these problems and then predict what's going to happen. Okay, so A is going to be 5 plus 7. Big is saved as A/3. Think about what that means. If you need to, review back up here to look at what floor division is and what you saw happen in the book. And then here's some practice stuff on printing. Okay? Play with this. The way that you learn coding is to code. So play around with Python Tutor. If you feel like you really enjoy this and you've not had a class in Python before, I'll have some links under this video about how to install Anaconda and a link to what I think is one of the best ways to learn Python online, totally free. But I'll link to all that for you. That's all for this week as far as Python goes. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you. I'll talk to you later.